Welcome to MathLink Academy. I am Mr. C, and we're going to be covering in this unit decimals, looking at place values and knowing how to round. So let's get started. Decimals or decimal fractions. A fractional decimal is written with a decimal point. Decimals are equivalent to common fractions, having denominators which are multiples of 10. The chart below gives the values or the place values for each digit in the number. So the number we have is 1.23456.7. Very unique number. Now, normally we don't necessarily say point. That point or that decimal that's between the 1 and the 2, we usually say and. So you could say 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and want to say those place values for each of that. So this decimal, again, you can look at as and. Some of us call it point. So on the particular side, going to the left side, the 1 is the 1 unit that we talked about before. Now going to the right of the decimal, immediately to the right, the 2 is the 10th. Again, we got to say it without spitting on somebody, 10th. The next unit, which is the 3, represent there, is the 100th. Then the 1,000th. Then the 10,000th. Then the 100,000th. Then the millionth. And then we have 10 millionth and 100 millionth. Now notice on the going to the right of the decimal, we have THS. So we understand that we're talking about those particular place values on the right of the decimal. So the immediate right for that 2 will be the 10th. Now let's look at reading decimal fractions. To read a decimal fraction, read the number as a whole number. Say the number of the decimal value of the last digit to the right. For example, I know a lot of us say 0.532, but really how you look at it is read it like a whole number. It's 532 thousandths. So how do we get the thousandths? Because we look at the 2 and the place value of that 2 is in the thousandth position. Just like we saw earlier with our place value, it's that third place value. And in this example here, is that 4. So when we look at our place value for this particular example, this 2 is in the thousandth. So how you properly read this, you just say it, 532 thousandth. And that's how we properly read decimal fractions. Let's look at some more as we go to our whiteboard. So let's look at these 2 examples. We're going to look at the example that are underlined in green. How do we say that? Since we have the decimal and those numbers are to the right of the decimal, you just say the number, 87. But since that 7th is in the 100th position, you say 87 hundredths. And so that's how you say it. Sometimes people put a 0 in front of it, 0.87. That's how we say it one way. But if you want to say it properly, it'll be 87 hundredths because of the 7 being the 100th position. Let's look at another one that's very unique now. This one right here, again, we have the decimals. We're looking at the numbers to the right, and that far position, that 7, is in the thousandth position. So when we finish saying it properly, we should say thousandth. So how do you say this properly? You say 1 and 837 thousandth. Again, the decimal is the word and. So we say 1 and 837 thousandth. Let's look at another one. So let's look at this number. How will we say it? 27 and 13 hundredth. Again, that 3, that last piece, that 3 tells us that's our place value that we're going to end up saying. So we say 27 and, as a decimal, 13 hundredth. Now let's talk about rounding decimal fractions or decimals. The rounding rule is pretty much the same as we round whole numbers. Determine the place value to which number is to be rounded. Determine that place value. Look at the digit immediately to the right. And then if the digit is less than 5, then we drop it off and all the other digits to the right. And then if the digit is greater or 5 or more, we add 1 to the digit in the place to which you are rounding, then drop all the other digits to the right. So let me show you an example what I mean by that. So let's go to our whiteboard and round some decimal values. So let's look at our whiteboard, and here's 3 examples and how we're going to round these 3 decimal values. So let's look at the top one. So we want to round, again, some of you say 0.357, but really looking at that 7th, meaning the 1,000th position, we say 357th. Now we want to round that number to the 100th. So what we look at is where the 100th is located, which is the 5. And then you look immediately to the right, which is that 7. And if that is greater than 5, 5 or greater, then we will do this. So let me show you how we'll round this. This will be 0.36. And then we just drop off the 7. We don't put a 0, we can just drop it off. And that'll be our answer for rounding to the 100th position. Let's look at the next example. So in this case, we want to round to the 1,000th. So what you do, you look at where the 1,000th is. The 1,000th position is right here. So in this case, we're going to look immediately to the right to see what we do with that 8. Since that is less than 5, strictly less than 5, that 1 that I circle, we will say the answer would be, in this case, we'll write it this way. The 8 will remain as an 8. And so how we say that, that is 8,000th. And that's our answer. And then we'll circle that. Let's look at the last one. The last number, we want to round it to the 10th. So to round to the 10th, you look at the 10th position, which is that 1 value. And then you look immediately to the right. I'm going to circle it to see if it's 5 or greater or less than 5 and see what you do with it. Since this is 5 and greater, which I circled in red, that 1 will become a 2. So in this case, we end up with 3 and 2/10. And then we'll circle that. So that's our basic idea of rounding. Now, the next thing I want to look at is expressing fractions as a decimal. Now, remember, a fraction actually can be expressed as a decimal because it's really a division sign. Fractions can be converted by decimals by dividing the numerator by the denominator. For example, let's look at this expression, 3/8 as a decimal. So 3/8 is a fraction, and we want to convert that as a decimal. So let's go to our whiteboard to see how that is particularly done. So here's our problem, 3/8, and we want to convert that fraction as a decimal. So what we're going to do is use long division. And now 3 can be expressed as 3.0000, as many zeros as you want, to continue the process of converting that particular fraction as a decimal. So now what we're going to do is divide. So we're going to see, can 8 go into 3? In this case, it cannot, but we're going to put our decimal here first. So the first thing I normally do is put my decimal first before I start dividing. So cannot go into 3, so we just look at the next number, 3 and the 0. So what number can we use without going over? In our case, we could use 3. And that 3 would be above the 0, not above the 3. It'd be above the 0 because we use that place value to help us get started in our division problem. So 3 times 8 is 24. And then we subtract. Remember, multiply, subtract is our pattern. This becomes 6. We bring down to 0. Now we look at 8 and 60. So what number can we use there? Without going over, it would be 7. So 7 times 8 is 56. Multiply, subtract. That's our pattern. Subtract, this would be a 4. Now we bring down to 0. Now, let's see what number we can use for that. It would be 5. 5 times 8 is 40. Subtract, and we end up a 0. Now, even though I have 4 zeros, I only use the 3 zeros pretty much. I really use the 3 zeros of the problem. I don't have to use any other zeros because our remainder is 0. And if I have more zeros at the end, it's no problem. You just want to make sure you have enough zeros so you can go all the way through your division problem. Since our remainder is 0, our answer is on the top. And so our answer in this case will be, this is a, and I'm going to write this down again, 3/8 is equal to 0.375, or properly we'll say 375 thousandths. And then I'll circle that. Now let's look at expressing decimals as a fraction. So now we're converting the decimal value as a fraction. Now to change a decimal to a fraction, use the number as the numerator and the place value of the last digit as the denominator. So for example, let's look what we have here. We have a decimal of, a lot of you would say 0.065, and we want to convert that to a fraction. But really say it properly. That's why I expressed to us how to say these numbers correctly, because it makes it a lot easier. So let's look on our whiteboard how to convert this decimal to a fraction. So here's our problem. And what we're going to do, we're going to say this properly. This is 65 thousandths. So again, we're looking at the place value, the last place value, 65 thousandths. And all you do is say exactly what you wrote. So this is equal to, write down 65 over 1,000. And that's how you write it as a fraction. Now we know we're not done because we must always simplify our fractions or reduce it. So 2 numbers I'm going to say can go into both of this, or 1 number is 5. And so if I divide both by 5, I will end up with, in this case, 13 over 200. And looks like in this case that that's my reduce or simplified fraction. So I'm just going to circle that. So what is this saying? This saying that 65 thousandths is equal to 13 over 200. Let's go back to another problem that we did earlier. Again, let's say this number. This is 375 thousandths. How do we know that? Because this is our last place value. You always say the last place value. And so if that's what that is, let's write down what we just said. 375,000 over 1,000. Now, again, we could reduce this, but since we did this earlier, we know eventually this can be reduced to 3/8. And that will be our answer, 3/8. Just like we did earlier of converting a fraction to a decimal, we can also convert a decimal to fraction by just saying what the number is and then simplify the expression. Well, I hope this lesson helped you with decimals. And if you have any other questions or want to go back over this video to get a better understanding and look at some of our resources also on MathLink Academy website, feel free to do that. Thank you again for watching this video, and we're about connecting the dots. Thank you.